Well, hello, everybody. It's lovely. It's lovely to see so many people coming into this meeting. Good morning if you're in Europe. Good evening if you're in Southeast Asia or in Asia. Absolutely delightful to see so many people coming to this session today. And my name is Sarah Kupke. I'm the head of professional learning at ECIS. And I'm absolutely delighted. It's my great honor to be able to introduce you to, or many of you probably already know, Margaret Parks, who's joining us for this conversation today. Margaret is an elementary school assistant principal at the Seoul Foreign School in South Korea. She's also on the Advisory Council for the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color, ALOC. And she's a co-founder of Soul of a Leader, about which we'll hear a bit more directly. Margaret is a Fulbright scholar. She received an education master's and certificate of advanced studies at Harvard Graduate School of Education. She thinks, talks about, and models leadership through an equity and justice lens. And she's committed to building capacity in others so that they can reach their fullest potential. She's quite a remarkable lady. Women leaders in international schools are still a rare breed. Women of color leaders, all the more so. Margaret is inspirational in her quest to create space, to let other people's light shine, and to redefine the structures established in our systems, to open up leadership opportunities to everyone. One of the things that made a great impact on me when talking to Margaret was how she talks about this work starts with critical self-reflection. I love that kind of humility and self-reflection that comes in everything that Margaret talks about. So Margaret, tell us your story. Start us off by telling us about you and how you came to be involved in this very important work.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for ECIS for creating this space. And I just wanted to take time to thank the audience as well. I know your time is precious for you joining us. It's so lovely to see familiar faces and for you to join this conversation because there's so many inspirational people in this room. So thank you. Sarah, that was just a very touching introduction. So I'm feeling very emotional in a good way. So thank you so much for building me up in that capacity. So just to give a background about me, Sarah has mentioned a pretty good summary, but I've been thinking about systems for a really long time, since I was really young. And I experienced and observed broken systems, but more than that, systems that didn't exist for underrepresented groups. And I didn't have the vocabulary to talk about it back then, but now I'm in leadership and I'm with amazing colleagues. Many of you are in the call right now. We talk about this. We talk about how systems don't work for everyone, or they weren't created by and for most groups of people. And so living my life as a person of color, as a woman, and now in leadership, there's lots that I experience and observe. And then talking to other women of color in leadership has been very helpful as well. So this is something I've been thinking about, I continue to think about, and I'll be thinking about for the rest of my life. As Sarah mentioned, I'm very interested in thinking about leadership through an equity and justice lens. And when I transitioned into leadership, I was looking for mentors who looked like me, who mirrored my experiences, but I was unable to find that. So, you know, when I went into leadership, I was all the more determined to find leaders who look like me. But in the Asia region, surprisingly, there's not that many women of color in leadership. And I guess my assumption going in was maybe I'll find women leaders who are Asian, maybe Korean descent. That would be wonderful. And I was looking around researching. I think I found two in in a very broad area, and then just people of color. It was hard to find, and so that got me thinking: like, how do we connect? How do we get leadership to be more diverse? And how are we going to do that? And so I just started talking with colleagues at Seoul Foreign School, and we were just chatting, and we had lots of discussions, regular discussions on leadership in general, just how to be effective leaders. And for me, my lens was, I want to see people who look like me. And that's how Soul of Leader was founded. So, we just got together and we wanted it to be educator based. And as I started talking to folks, and a lot of you are on this call as well, there's so many of us out there who are looking for the same thing. We just needed a common space. And so we got talking, and our team is so proud of our last conference. And again, many of you have attended and were speaking at the conference. The Soul of a Leader that happened last year, which is one of our, we're so proud of this event because it was just so successful on so many levels. We were trying to challenge the status quo of how conferences were done. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was compensate all the speakers, because we noticed that in educational conferences, keynote speakers, featured speakers get compensated, and then most other presenters, almost all of them, go for free. And all of these people who are speaking are amazing, right? They deserve to be compensated for their time. So we actually eliminated featured speakers and compensated everyone. And I think that was huge because we wanted to set that role model for other conferences to do the same. We were also very intentional about inviting a diverse group of people to come. So when educators came to the conference and leaders, they would see themselves represented. And that's one of the most common feedback we got, where folks actually said, this is like the first time I felt represented, or I felt like I belonged somewhere. And that's huge. And that was our goal. And so we're committed to continuing to do that. And that's how Soul of a Leader was started. I guess I'll let you kind of ask another question. I'll chime in. I don't want to talk too much at once.
Sure. And what I should, of course, have mentioned at the beginning of this is that we have this large number of people who are with us today, which is fabulous. But this is a recorded conversation, and so other people that will be joining at a different time by watching this later on. If any of the participants want to put questions, we're going to make sure that you've got some time to do that at the end. But if you want to stick your questions into the chat as well, you're very, very welcome to do so. But my next question, sort of building on that Soul of the Leader intention, and obviously very successful in your last conference, those 2 points of compensation for your speakers, and seeing participants seeing representation in the people that are speaking and seeing themselves in them. I'd be interested in following that line and thinking about, through your work, you've collected stories about women in leadership, many stories, and particularly women of color in leadership. How do you advise women about overcoming imposter syndrome in a system that doesn't provide for certain groups?
No, that's a wonderful question. And my assumption is that all of us on this call have experienced imposter syndrome. And I just want to highlight something that Sarah said. She said, systems that weren't built for us, right? I think that's really important, because the first thing with imposter syndrome, I think almost every woman of color I've spoken to has mentioned they have imposter syndrome in some form of another. And we have to kind of reflect and think, why is that the case? So imposter syndrome, that's when we feel like we're not deserving or worthy of something, right? It's when we feel uncomfortable receiving compliments. It's when we're fearful of being exposed. We're fearful of failing. We don't acknowledge our strengths, right? And if you're like me, we never take credit for our successes. It's always the circumstance, it's always someone else. And so we just never feel good enough. And I think one thing that's really important, if you are in an underrepresented group, is to understand that many of the systems that we're in, they weren't built for us. They weren't built by people that look like us. And that alone, that's gonna cause a lot of unique experiences that people in the majority will not face. And so because of that alone, in my perspective, it's very understandable why we experience imposter syndrome, because we cannot share the same successes of those around us because the system wasn't created for us. And so I think that is something to keep in mind. Keeping that in mind, imposter syndrome, it is a pattern of thinking. And most of you know, and for those of you who do not know, I was a counselor in my former life. And so I actually worked a lot with imposter syndrome on the other end as a counselor, how to help people reframe their situation, rewire their brain. The really hopeful part about imposter syndrome is that you can rewire your brain to think differently, but it takes intentionality and it takes support. And so one of the things that helped me and a lot of the women that I've talked to, and particularly women of color, is just reframing your situation. So for example, I feel like a failure, right? Maybe we can reframe that as, okay, let's reframe that failure as an opportunity to learn or a gift of learning. Let's use that lens and let's move forward. Another thing is that with imposter syndrome, if we're thinking like feeling like we're not good enough, oftentimes our facts and feelings, they go together, but in reality, it's not the same thing. And a lot of you are probably nodding because maybe you feel like a failure in one area of your life, and then it just spills over everywhere. Like I'll give a very good example. I was talking to a colleague last week. She's incredible. She's an incredible educator. You can take her to a public jury. She's probably a very excellent educator, really good at what she does, but she felt like she was failing in one area of her teaching. And, I was chatting with her, and then she was just sharing like, oh, and then I'm failing in this area of my life and that area of my life as a mom, as a wife, as a friend. And it was just interesting how this one failure that she perceived in her work life permeated in all areas of her life. And we actually had to talk about this and like talk through it. And I think oftentimes that happens to us, and you need support. You need someone you trust to tell you, hey, let's separate your feelings from the facts. So that's exactly what I did. Okay, let's go through wherever you feel like a failure. Let's reframe it. Let me offer another perspective. And we had to like work through that. And Sarah, you and I had a talk previously, and I love how you phrased it. You said we have to expand our collective capacities. And I love that because that's exactly what we have to do. Collectively, we have to come together and support each other so that we can help each other. Reshma Saujani, she is the author of Brave, Not Perfect. And she talks about how we condition women to be not brave, and we condition our boys to be brave. So for example, she mentions in her book, like we're on the playground, a lot of parents, if a girl is like falling or a girl tries to take risks, it's like, okay, get down from there. We have to protect you. It's that kind of interaction. But with boys, oh, be brave, go jump off the slide, go on the top of the swing, go climb that tree, right? And she was talking about how harmful that is. In the future, let's fast forward 20 years later, right? When you're trying to get a job. And so, she talks about how women, they're not going to take those risks, right? They're not going to, and research backs this up. And I know a lot of us on this call probably have had this experience. We look at a job description and we don't tick 100%, we're not even going to apply. But then we see our male colleagues, and some of them will just take half. I've had many wonderful dear male friends that I love, and they'll literally apply for jobs. They don't even have half, and they're so confident, and they get the job. And so I think that's a difference, right? And it's how we're conditioned as well. So that's something I wanted to bring up because it really made me think about, especially those of us in education, how we treat our girls, how we treat our boys in the classroom setting, in the playground, and as parents, how do we do that as well? And then just one more thing about imposter syndrome. I think it's really, really important, again, that we need people to remind us of our successes. Most people with imposter syndrome, we're not going to go and give ourselves a pat on the back, right? We need affirmation from people we trust. And I think that's where that collective capacity comes in. You need someone to tell you, like, you're really good at what you do. And again, I know I'm going to call out, I think Nika's on this call. She's a dear friend of mine. She's on this call. And I know we talk about imposter syndrome a lot, and we have to do that for each other, right? We have to call each other. And, when we're feeling down, we have to talk about it. And, she always gives me encouragement, and I try to do the same. And it's so refreshing. So we need those people to like build us up and lift us up when we are experiencing imposter syndrome.
Thank you so much. I think there's so many aspects of what you've just talked about, from the sort of conditioning that we have from our upbringing, and the influences in our lives from family, perhaps from our school environment, from the society in which we live. That sort of ladder of inference, which building from our experiences develops into our value systems and our belief systems about ourselves, let alone about everybody else. And you know, we're all on this journey of understanding, and all of us at different times in our lives touching on different parts, of course. But your work is inspiring us to create and expand our collective capacities, because you're talking about the fact that we do need support. This isn't a journey that we go on our own, and we do need to find people who are able to support our own expansion and growth, and perhaps not always just leave us feeling comfortable with where we are. So, you know, through supporting each other and giving feedback to one another, we have also talked, you and I, about the terms that you use of calling in and calling out. Within our work situations, these are really, you know, these are really vital to a collective growth within an organization. Tell us a little bit more and help us to understand a little bit more about these two terms of calling in and calling out.
Yeah, no, this is actually something I do a lot of workshops on, because I feel like if organizations have a culture of calling in, it's basically giving feedback with grace and receiving and giving feedback. It's just healthier for the organization overall. And it also helps those in marginalized groups. And so calling in, that's when it's giving feedback to someone in an honest way, but you're in a situation where you can do that. It's modeled for you. You've already have evidence that you can call in, and particularly those in positions of power have modeled it and have made a space where calling in is acceptable and it's a norm. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. Calling out is when you do it in public. It's when, so calling out is, it's different. It's a little more, it's more direct, and it basically, you have to let someone know that their actions and words can't be tolerated because it's causing harm. So that's when you call out. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about calling in. And so, like I mentioned before, it's giving honest feedback in a way that's helpful, again, with grace, with love. And it actually, the goal of calling in is reflection. It's not about a reaction. It's about getting folks to reflect. And when we're talking about power differences, it's really important that those in power think about that, because it is so hard to call in someone when you're not in the same position of power and privilege. So I've had many leaders above me who are amazing people, like amazing, incredible, very kind and generous. But even though I feel comfortable like sharing, I won't necessarily call them in unless I have some kind of evidence that that person can actually accept the feedback. And I have to feel safe in an environment to do that. I have to feel brave. And so I think that takes intentionality of those facilitating spaces or those in leadership to make sure there's a culture of calling in. And again, I just want to emphasize the power dynamic part, because I think that's really important. If you're in the same position of privilege and power, it's a different conversation when there's a power dynamic. And so again, I believe it's the responsibility of those in power to make sure that this is happening and you're modeling it. So for example, if I'm leading a meeting, because of my position and privilege and power as a principal at Seoul Foreign School, I am going to be mindful of that. And so if I'm meeting with teachers, I have to show them that I can be called in. So, you know, if someone does call me and they're brave enough to do that, I'm going to respond and I'm going to let everyone know that that was okay and thank them for that. And so they'll do it again next time. And then I'll call people in my meetings, which I've had to do many times, but everyone knows that that's the norm. And so it's not threatening. It's more, oh, okay, Margaret shared something and I have to reflect on it. And so again, that takes intentionality. And again, it's receiving feedback, reframing it as, oh, this is the gift of learning. If you really think about it, for someone to tell you something, to call you in, if something you said hurt them, unintentionally or intentionally, what a gift that is, right? Because now you know, most people are conflict avoidant. I'm just saying that from personal experience, being a counselor for over 10 years. Most of the counseling I did was because people are conflict avoidant. They needed help having difficult conversations, calling people in, calling people out. How do I talk to XYZ? And so most people just aren't comfortable sharing. But if we shift that, if we reframe our conversation, we reframe how we look at calling in, I think it's so important. And can you imagine if all organizations had a culture where we can just call people in and it was accepted and that's the norm? I mean, it would be so much healthier, right? We wouldn't have to worry about, oh, how are people feeling? Am I intentionally harming somebody? And again, if we're talking about power imbalance, those who are underrepresented groups, if they feel comfortable calling in, you will know where the gaps are because there's so many blind spots. And as leaders, we want to know where our blind spots are, and who better to tell us than the people we work with.
We have some great examples in the people that we work with in that characteristically, I think children and young people are possibly better at this than than adults are. We move into sort of modes of behavior, don't we, within our leadership structures. We're back to those systems again now, where we set up a whole new rule structure of what's okay to say. And so I think that when you're talking about the power structure, I think that that's a really important, or the status games that we play that we perhaps don't even understand. So that intentionality is really important. I just adore the way you speak about giving honest feedback with grace and love, and creating that culture. And I do believe that it is possible, having worked in many schools, many different schools, and seen different structures, that actually creating that culture is something that can be changed and can be extraordinarily liberating if we do it well. I'm going to go back to what you talked about at the beginning when you were saying that the self-reflection that's involved. But you also talk about the power of having critical friends. And I think this is an important balance, isn't it? Our self-criticism, or not criticism, but our self-critique. And then having voices that we can bounce ideas off, who are prepared to be able to point things out to us, but with whom we can also practice. And I think some of those conversations that are so essential to creating that culture, we sometimes need to practice as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience and your views on the idea of critical friends?
Yes, absolutely. I can say I would not be where I am today without my critical friends. I've been very fortunate because my siblings have been my critical friends since I was like 5 years old. So I come from a family who constantly give me feedback. So for me, that was very normal to get feedback in how I talk and how I act. So that was a norm for me. So as I went into adulthood, I actually sought out folks who were critical friends. So when I mean by critical friends, those who can be your mirrors and those who are not scared to hurt your feelings, because they have your best interest in mind. Those are the ones who will call you in. It doesn't even have to be something that has been done directly. It's like, we'll be sharing, and someone might say, hey, Margaret, can you share what you did again in your meeting or what you did at work? And I'll share, and they'll offer another perspective. Hey, do you think that was the best way? Could you have done that differently? And we share. And I think that's so important to have critical friends in all areas of your life, professionally, personally, emotionally. And so I think that is intentional. I have several groups of critical friends in all areas of my life, and we're actually intentional about meeting, and we're intentional about the purpose of our meeting. So, if it's professional, I have a group of folks that inside my organization, outside my organization, that help me through things. And so we'll actually talk about it, and they know that I am looking for feedback or encouragement. And we meet regularly. And it's again, everyone knows why they're there. We're here to be critical friends for each other. And again, you need to trust this group. So that trust is important. And that's why you know, that's, you can choose them. You can invite people to, hey, do you want to try this? And also intentional about meeting. And so, yeah, we're going to make an effort. We're going to protect this time. It doesn't have to be every, you know, every day, every week. It could be once a month, maybe bi-monthly. Some groups, maybe it's once a year. I don't know, you know, it depends on, you know, what it's for. But again, that critical friendship is so important because we need those mirrors. We have to start with that critical self-reflection. But as we talked about, if you're, you know, in an underrepresented group, most people are going to have some kind of imposter syndrome, and your critical self-reflection may not be accurate. That's where the critical friends come in too. I think for me, more than telling me where my blind spots are, I've used my critical friends group to encourage me and build me up. Because when I'm feeling down, you know, I need someone that I trust to tell me, actually, you're fine, you're doing great, and tell me all the great things that I'm doing. I need that reminder, because if I'm just on my own, I'm most likely to just focus on the areas of growth, right? Where do I have to grow? But I need folks to tell me that. And, you know, I always reflect in my journal after I have these talks, and it's so amazing all the time, just how built up I feel. Because, you know, when I first started this, it was like, oh, critical friends, like, you know, being intentional about it. I was actually pretty hesitant. I was like, do I really want to do this? Do I need it? But it is awesome. Like, it is so helpful and beneficial. I encourage everyone on the call, if they're not intentional about having these groups, to do that right away, and start that. And for me, that reflection piece has been so important, because it's literally just a few sentences, but I just jot down how I'm feeling. And so when I'm feeling down, I just go back to my reflection, and I need that as a reminder. Like, wow, this is how I was feeling after I talked to my critical friends group. I need a pick me up, and I'll just reread my journal. But that works for me. And so again, the value of critical friends, it's not only, again, just to help you with your blind spots, it's for that encouragement piece, which we all need. We all need affirmation. We all need someone in our lives, or people in our lives, to help us see the full picture of ourselves, not just one aspect of it, in an honest way. And it's a lifelong process of growing. Like, how can you grow without these critical friends in areas of your life? So I'm assuming a lot of people on this call are interested in leadership. And so if you're in leadership, we have to model that too, right? We have to model that we are continually on this journey of learning. We have people who are holding us accountable both ways, where we want to grow in our areas of strength, and we're constantly reflecting and doing that over and over again. I think it's just an amazing, such an impactful practice.
I was fortunate enough to be able to do a training in solution-focused therapy some years ago. And one of the things that we were asked to do was to write down what we're like when we're our best selves. And so when I'm at my best, what does that look like? It's not when I'm better than somebody else. It's not when I've hit 100%. It's how do I feel, and what do I notice about myself when I'm at my best? What would other people notice about me? Does my spouse notice? What do the children at school notice? And we sat there and we started to write down the things about ourselves, and then to tell each other the things about ourselves when we're at our best. And it's a really interesting exercise, because when you've written down 5 things, you feel kind of pleased with yourself. When you've got to 10 things, you're beginning to struggle, and 15 feels very, very uncomfortable. And am I just blowing my own trumpet, or is this actually a self-reflection here? But they were asking us to write down 35 things that we would notice about ourselves. And when you start to examine what that list looks like, that becomes your toolkit of your strengths and your energy and your spirit, and it's a really, really helpful thing to look back at when you're feeling down.
I love that, Sarah. I'm writing it down, and so I will definitely take that. I'm going to journal that tonight.
It's a really interesting one, and then of course, how that changes as well according to where we are in our lives. But I'm going to just take a quick look at one of the chat comments that came from Megan in Hanoi. She was going back to when we were talking about the culture of calling in, and she says, agreed. A culture of calling in really has to begin with us as leaders, inviting the bravery that takes. Also explicitly training people in how to have these courageous conversations. It's not easy, and it's a skill that can be learned. Thank you for that comment. I think it really sums up well what Margaret was saying there, and it is so important there. And then Jodie also, I love the idea of a professional journal. Thank you. So just to take us then on from I think what was really important that came out of that, it's an interesting aspect of, you know, having our critical friends, or having our, as Fran Perlman would talk about, you know, having your personal trustees or board of directors, people that you choose to be able to support in this way. We're talking about diversity, but these are people that we probably do want to be with in order to be able to be more homogeneous, no? But in our structures within school, as you know, schools, industry, business, if cognitive homogeneity is the norm in our societies and our organizations, and in our case, international schools, what initiatives might we take to change these systemic structures? For example, in the recruitment of leadership teams, in the recruitment of our teachers in our schools, in leaders for learning. I was talking to somebody recently who was saying, you know, she has in her recruitment process, in her application process, started to notice if schools are asking, for example, are you a native English speaker? She doesn't then apply for the post anymore. This is somebody who is absolutely fluent in English, but learned it as a teenager and an adult. But her home language is in fact Spanish, and feels completely discriminated when she's asked as a question before interview whether, and using that language of native language. And
yes, I think
application process. These are really important tasks. Oh, am I being unstable again?
That's okay. You're good now. You're back.
So these systems that are in place, which unwittingly perhaps, but in 2022 we need to be very conscious of. Help us to think through a little bit about these systems that are in place.
No, absolutely. I'm so glad you asked this question, because it's so important. And I know there's lots of people on the call who probably have a lot of wisdom and experience as well. So feel free to write in the chat as well, your perspective as well. In terms of recruitment, I would say that's one of the easiest areas to make change. If you're in charge of recruitment, if you're in a leadership team, it's really important to think about, you know, what I hear a lot is, oh, is this person a good fit? Right. And it's a general statement. I know many of us on this call have heard that, or maybe used it yourself, but we have to ask ourselves, who created the criteria for the fit? And oftentimes when you're looking at organizations, it's certain group of people who've created that, which means if it's the same type of homogeneous group of people who've created the fit, they're looking for a certain type of a person. So if you're in an underrepresented group, the criteria was not made for you. So you illustrated it so beautifully, like, you know, like your colleague, she didn't match the criteria, and she probably would have been phenomenal, but she didn't match it, so she didn't even apply. And so it's so important that you have people on the table that are diverse. And Nika's on this call, but when in her school, what they did was they took out IB experience as one of the top criteria, because and they said, you know, diversity is important right now. We will train you. We know that you can get there. And so because that school was intentional at making a priority, that was the lens they use. We want to diversify. And as a result, you know, leadership teams get diverse. And if you have different perspectives, you're going to automatically have different criteria. And so when you're going over the criteria of hiring, it's really important to re-examine, first of all, where did this come from, right? Well, this is our criteria. You know, again, who created it and is this working for us? And then again, re-examining and having a diverse group of people to the table and asking yourself, who's not at the table that needs to be there? Right? You know, as a leadership team, you know, maybe it's not just leaders. Maybe we need to bring in other teachers. Maybe we need to bring in other, you know, folks from other groups to come in and help us, right? And so I think that's really important. Also, when we're thinking about like recruitment, again, I think a lot of times in international schools, it seems like there are certain certain agencies that most people use over and over again. Again, we have to ask ourselves those questions, like the criteria of these search agencies. Like, I think because they've existed for so long, it's the status quo, right? And when we're trying to challenge systems of oppression, trying to break them down, we have to challenge the status quo, and that's uncomfortable. So that means we have to start talking to those in charge and asking them what their criteria is. And if it's not matching, then we have to create our own table. We have to create our own system. And so again, it's asking these questions, but I would say, again, very easy to do. Just make sure your team is diverse in all aspects. And, you know, we're in a really good space right now because there's so many consultants, a bunch of them are on this call, that will help out, right? Are we looking at race, class, gender? Are we looking at, you know, all aspects of diversity and making sure that all those voices are heard at the table and doing that? I talked to one of my friends, Elisa Pereira's, she's a consultant, and she recommends that all schools have a short diversity equity statement. It's very short, and then using that lens in all of the policies, including recruitment. And when you are committed to having a lens like that, you'll ask the right questions. So it's really just about getting diverse people at the table and then having that lens, and then again, having those people to ask the questions. You just start, right? And again, there's so many folks that can help out with this. And so please know you're not alone. And so if you are in an organization, you feel like your recruitment process can be, can be changed, then please reach out. You can reach out to me or Sarah. We can connect you and we can connect you with some consultants and start that dialogue.
Yeah, thank you. Schools talk about having a quota, a women's quota. Well, not just schools, industry and business as well. Politics too, you know, I think you've certainly in conversation with me said, wouldn't it be lovely to be able to work with a world that didn't need quotas? Tell us about your feelings about women's quotas.
Yeah, no, yes, we did have a conversation about that, and I always, you know, I chuckle at that when, you know, because a lot of people have asked me about that, because like you said, Sarah, like we chatted about it. It's like, why do we even have to have a quota? That shouldn't be the case, but it is. And so because this is the system we're working with, I think, again, we have to accept that that's what we're working in, but we don't have to be in that system, right? This is it, but we can make change. And so I did want to just highlight, you know, when you're talking about women in leadership, I recently read an article in Harvard Business Review, and they were talking about specifically women of color in leadership. And it was very interesting because they talked about different types of capital that women bring to the table. And for me, it was really great because it articulated everything that I've been thinking about. So they talked about cultural capital, basically what kind of value women of color and women add to the workplace. And they talked about resistance capital, which is that's, you know, when you're in an underrepresented group, you're always resisting status quo. And when you're doing that, you actually gain a lot of skills. Like conversations, you have to learn how to navigate difficult conversations. You have to look for systems that aren't working and actively try to make them work or create another system. That is really valuable in an organization. So looking through it through that lens. Also navigational capital. This is when you're, again, actively challenging oppressive systems. It's similar where you have to navigate these really challenging systems, and most people have been doing that their whole lives. So when you apply that to like an organizational setting, it's pretty amazing because, you know, these folks, they've been navigating challenging systems, so they can handle anything you send their way. Difficult conversations, difficult crisis management, you know, talking about really uncomfortable topics. They've been doing this their whole life, and so that was really eye-opening for me to read about. I'm like, oh, that's so true. And then they talked about linguistic capital. So if you have folks who are speaking various languages, come from different cultures, how amazing is that? The intellectual skills, the communication skills that come with that, they can bridge cultures, right? And they could help you with different perspectives. So, you know, this article was really great because when we talk about like women in leadership, women of color in leadership, we have to understand the value that they bring. And again, unfortunately, oftentimes it's not thought about enough. And so we just have to be intentional about highlighting that, especially in leadership positions, because one of the number one things that I hear since I entered leadership in an international school setting, actually a lot of people from all over the world contact me because they're like, I just needed to find someone who looked like me. And you're like one of the only ones out there. And, you know, I reflected on that because I'm like, that's really sad that, you know, I'm one of the only ones out there that they could find, right? And so I think we have to change that. And that means we have to get more women and more women of color in leadership. We need to do that for the collective. And if we work in a school, we have to also think about our students, right? Many of them are girls, and for our boys, they have to see representation. If they don't see it, it's not their norm. A lot of our little, you know, our little ones, they're not going to even aspire to be in leadership if they don't see people who look like them. It is so important. Representation matters. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I know a lot of us on this call, we agree with that, but I cannot say that like loud enough. We need representation, and it is so important for that to happen.
Yep, thank you so much. And I think that's a time to acknowledge the men that are on this call as well, because this isn't about an exclusive group. This is about us all being allies, right? And I think the important, really important point there about us being able to see ourselves in the people that are our leaders as young children, as young adults, and as older people too. I'm just going to refer to our chat and then just open up in case anybody has any questions.
And while you're doing that, Sarah, can I just make one point, just because you made a really good point about acknowledging the men in the room? I think it's so important. Anytime you're in a position of power, you're the one who's going to make the change. So for example, if you're a man in leadership, it's really you who's going to open up doors for women in leadership because you're in the majority. Likewise, if you're a white person and it's a person of color, it's the white people who are going to help. If someone like me who's cisgender, who's a female, right, I am going to open the door for those who are not, right? So if you're in the majority, you're the ones who are going to open the doors for others. And so it is so important that we have, you know, people in positions of privilege and power helping us. And just one more thing I wanted to add, all of us in here, sometimes we're in a position of privilege and power, and sometimes we're not, depending on our context. And so we're navigating that is hard, but all of us at one point will be in a position of privilege and power. And how are we going to leverage our power so that we can dismantle these systems of oppression so everyone can thrive just as they are?
And we've had, you know, again, in our conversations, we've talked about that position of power being one that we need to be really, I think, to embrace with humility, in that we're not necessarily, well, we're definitely using that to leverage other people's power, to discover that in themselves, to empower, to enable, to ennoble other people. And that we're not necessarily inviting them to our table, but we are together creating a new table. And I think that's an important. So let me just go to the chat now. Dr. Emily Meadows, I co-facilitate a whiteness accountability group for international educators, which can be one piece of this process for white international educators, and includes a link for us there. Cam Chauhan, our Executive Director of ECIS, who's also on the call. Margaret, thank you. I'm so glad this is recorded as I need to make a list of things to do. And Judy thanks us for creating the platform for informative and inspiring conversation. Shireen mentions one diverse person at the table is too heavy a burden to bear alone. That's a really interesting diversity battle fatigue. That's a really interesting point there, Shireen. Thank you. Bridget is thanking us there. Yeah.
And I would love to highlight Emily Meadows. I think if she's still on the call, but I hope she doesn't mind me sharing. But she originally, you and her had connected for a talk like this, and she, when she contacted me, she actually said, like, I think, as a woman of color, you should go first. And Emily's also doing really important work, supporting LGBTQ, and so that was a really wonderful example of using her position to leverage me. And so I just wanted to give her a shout out, because I think that's what we need more of. We need to kind of support each other. And so thank you, Emily. And again, thank you, ECIS.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I add one more thing, Margaret? Thank you for that. And I'm so excited to be here. I also just wanted to lift up Sarah, because she immediately said, great. Who should I call? Who do you recommend? And so I was able to then connect her with you and to say, here are some great people who are doing this work. And she was right on it, like organizing the events. So it takes a lot of people working together to make these things happen. So thanks ECIS and Sarah and Cam for hosting this event.
Yeah, thank you. And it's lovely to see you, Emily, on virtually. We've never really met, so it's lovely to see you here.
Thank you, Emily. Any questions or comments from the people that are on the call?
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourselves. We want this to be comfortable and casual. I would love to hear from folks in the chat. Even if you wanted to share something you resonated with or examples, that would be lovely. Because I know we, like all of you in the audience, have so much to offer. So please share.
Good morning, Margaret.
Good morning.
Great to meet you. And what you were saying was just fascinating. You
Thank
created
you, Cam.
a big list for us to do. And it's so nice to hear the things you're suggesting and some of the things that ECIS are trying to do. We're really committed to this work, and Sarah is just such a brilliant addition to the team.
Agreed.
So much. So thank you so much, Margaret. I can't believe I need to listen to the talk again, as I put in the chat room, because you're right about the groups as well. And actually, that's what we're trying to do at ECIS. We're being collaborative. We don't want anyone to be excluded. Anybody can use this platform for the work they want to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cam. It's lovely to meet you virtually as well.
Nobody's raised their hand at the moment. Perhaps people having a think or whatever. But as the clock's racing, one of the things that I think is really valuable for people, well, for all of us on our journey of trying to understand our lives better and to be able to be better people, is about where am I on this, and how can I find out more? So I think it is important to mention that ECIS actually launched their platform for DEIJ and with really within a lens of belonging in May of last year, and has done a lot of work, and you can see on the website, on the DEIJ and belonging website, that we're gradually pulling resources together, people who are able to be ambassadors for the work that we're doing in all of our schools and organizations around the world. It's important to know where to go, as it were. So I'm gonna throw a question at you now that this is the desert island question. If you found yourself on a desert island and you only had one book you could take with you, what would be a book that you would recommend people to read?
Oh, wow. That is that's like the hardest question, because I love reading and there's so many good books out there. I think for me, I really appreciate like fiction, more than nonfiction is great because it gives you like points, but I love books that through story, it brings out everything that we're talking about. So I think, Emily, you and I tweeted about The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. It's one of my favorites right now, but I recommend books like that because it's a story, but the author does a really great job of actually, it talks about colorism, it talks about inequity, and it talks about injustice in the system, but through a story. It's historical fiction, kind of. So it's about a town, a made-up town, but it talks about all these things that the characters have to go through. And I actually like books like that. So it's not just one book. I actually have probably, if you contact me, I have like, I'm reading all the time. But that was the most recent book, but it really got me thinking about, you know, inequity and then how to address it. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a general answer. I know it's not like, you know, the answer you might have been looking for, but I love fiction. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, ECIS had as a book club a focus, Empire Land, which I think I've got on my shelf there, by Satnam Sagara. Yeah. It was a book that, you know, the tome came through the post, and I thought, oh no, I've got to get through this. And it was absolutely the most fascinating read. And happened to be a non-fiction book. I mean, he is a journalist, and I mean, the research that's gone into the book has been extraordinary. But it's not everybody that wants to sit and read through a non-fiction piece. But it was something that helped me to reflect on my imperialistic inheritance in a really, really important way. To understand where some of my thinking comes from that I take for granted. And I've been somebody who's been thinking I've been working in a world where I've been conscious about what I'm trying to do. And for decades, I mean, you can see by the color of my hair, it's gone on for a long time. And yet this was something that then again made me just realize the systems in which I've been brought up. And yet, if you can look at nonfiction, if you can look at fiction and dive into a story, it also helps us to reflect on our personal stories and therefore our assumptions. Wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did want to add something about books because it's hard to say one book, but I do recommend to look at your library and making sure your authors are diverse, because even like I love to read on leadership, but most of the books on leadership, they're not from people who look like me. So although I can get gems, I'm not going to really relate to it, which is why, you know, I was interviewing an author, Min Lei, at a previous panel, and he says we have to write ourselves into existence. That's why he became an author, because he couldn't see people or experiences that reflected his experiences as an Asian man. And so I think that's what we have to do. So those of you out there, there's so many inspirational people in the audience, please write those books. We need you on our shelves. We need to write that. But, you know, again, if you are reading, just really being intentional about who's writing and what kinds of authors you're writing, because even you might have not known, but like even for me, subconsciously, I was reading a lot of white authors. Probably 99.9% of my reading until I was an adult was from white authors. And again, great. I love the literature. I grew so much. I gained so much from it. But what I realized is when I read Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings recently, and I'm just crying because I'm like, oh my goodness, it's the first time I feel represented in literature. She's talking about a Korean American experience. Like I've never had that before. And so it was so emotional. And I know a lot of you on this call might have had that experience too, when there was a character who mirrored your experiences. It's so important. And I did just want to share, while you were talking, Sarah, there was one thing I did want to kind of talk to the audience about and maybe get some last minute thoughts from them, because I was just thinking about, you know, even those on this call, I'm assuming all of us are here because we care about this work, but like, why are we here? It's probably because we've been harmed by the system. If you look at any DEIJ team, it's folks in marginalized groups, right? So it's very interesting to me. Like every time I talk to teams, and even the past few months, I've been talking to a lot of teams who are doing DEIJ work. They're all in marginalized groups. And then, you know, and if there is someone who's in the dominant group, it's rare, right? And so I think that's something that we have to think about. So if you are in the majority, it's really important that we do this together. Again, those collective capacities, let's do this together, because I think someone made a comment in the chat, we can't do it alone. But I just thought that was just something I've been thinking about. Like, why is that always the case? It's because we've been harmed, right? And then we're trying so hard to, to make systems work or create our own. But, at the end of the day, it's hard work. We need those in the majority to help us out. We need that support. And so again, as I mentioned before, sometimes we're going to be in the majority, sometimes we're not. And so when we are, we have a sphere of influence. Let's use it. Let's all help each other where we can. And I do believe, I know this is cliche, we can make this world a better place. All of us here are. We just have to continue. We have to support each other. So I just wanted to share that. And if anyone has any comments, please, unmute yourselves. I would love to hear your perspectives as well.
Well, Margaret, we're running to the end of the hour. I mean, whether you believe this or not, we're actually, hitting the hour, which is just extraordinary. And I think you're helping us to do this. And so I thank you. It's as I said at the beginning, it's been a real honor to be able to engage in this conversation with you, and I've learned so much from you, and I hope that our conversations will continue. And I thank everybody who's come here today to join the call, and then people that will hopefully be listening into the call at a later point, because it's been recorded. It's been inspirational. I think you model what we're aspiring towards, and we thank you for being part of our community and our extended community around the world. So from ECIS, a very, very great thank you to Margaret Park for this conversation today. Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate your time. Thank you to ECIS. And please connect with me. I think a lot of you were already connected through Twitter or email, but please connect with me. I would love to stay in touch and maybe collaborate in the future. Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.